Hey, good morning, everybody, and liberty warriors and justice seekers and truth seekers alike. Welcome to my effort that is seemingly endless and yet at the same time befuddling because, I'm still battling the Borg and trying to somehow catch wind and get the critical mass to get the information that I have inside my head and everywhere all over that I've made available online to the millions of people that need to see it. And like always, a lot of things coming at us left and right, but more and more revelations that validate everything that it is that I'm explaining to you and expressing to you. And I'm trying to find a way to your heart and to your mind so that you can plug in and you can get the frequencies of what it is that I'm laying on you because it's monumentally larger, even though everything that's coming down the pike is pretty incredibly insane, but monumentally larger, and it's really the causation of everything. Where do I want to start? Well, I guess the way I want to start is depending, like if this is Groundhog Day, I want to be able to make you aware of who I am and just outright say with transparency who I am and what I'm doing and why, and try to make it as brief as possible to hopefully make it compelling so that you can help me like and subscribe and share so that we can build a tidal wave movement, a tidal wave crusade, populist movement, a tidal wave populist movement crusade to purge corruption. Why? Because we're inundated, surrounded, overwhelmed, drowning from corruption. And I know all of us know that, but the bottom line is, what do you know? What details do you know? And what are you actually buying? Because from where I'm sitting, so far, the only thing that Americans buy are lies. And that's not me. That's why this is the truth bomb. I'm truth bombing the con, and the whole thing's a freaking insane con. So, where to begin? So, a few things. It's so funny. My mind is racing to about 15 different key points I can use as like the key to unlock the door, and it's like where to begin. It's like that's how much information is out there, and it's maddening. I guess I want to start with some context. So I just happened to do a Google search on me, Patrick Lovell, and I was curious to see what would pop up. And I do this frequently from time to time just to kind of see how the algos actually are providing more recent information, if at all. And, I was reminded of this immense struggle, what I call the righteous grind, that I personally have been in the midst of for the past 3 years. Now, the past 3 years is an extension of the previous 10 years because I had to go aggregate answers to questions that befuddled me because nothing made sense. And we've been living like Groundhog Day in this continuum for the past 20 years. And, when I saw that there were articles and things like The Guardian and some pretty significant PR that took place in and around when we launched the con, which interestingly enough was a soft launch. And maybe I'll try to explain what that means later. But we had a distributor, we had a great publicist, they got us great information, but we landed in August. It was at the tail end of the 2020 election cycle. And then when we started to really pick up steam, of course, the insurrection happened and we kind of got buried. And a lot of things happened behind the scenes that over the course of last year, 3 years, I found out that whether it was some sort of blacklist that, let's just say BlackRock, for example, had us at the top of the list, that all acquisitions execs at all the major streamers knew not to actually purchase our revelations, or further, maybe something like, I don't know, I hate to say, somebody affiliated with an intelligence agency. Now that we understand that we have an intelligence censorship complex, care of Matt Taibbi and his work recently, particularly the Twitter files, which is interesting. But it's like, given all of the insanity that I'm, touching upon, that I'll reveal to you as I try to maneuver through this, I don't have evidence that the Borg, led by BlackRock, because of what we reveal, that leads directly to BlackRock and really the entire financial sector that has absolute control. I don't know that they had us on a blacklist because I don't have that evidence. What I do know is that people that tend to be acquisitions execs, if they're mid-level players, they're yes men and they don't ask questions. They do what they're told and they read between the lines and they deliver, because if they don't, they'll get fired. And those, the further up the ladder, if you get to the top, and the network players that can see the big picture and they have all the answers and they know what the left hand is doing and the right hand is doing, you know, would they have enough sense that they don't want to piss off their funders that provide the liquidity and the debt financing that huge operations like Time Warner, Discovery, and Netflix and so forth depend upon to finance their business model? Well, it doesn't seem like it'd take a rocket scientist, given the lay of the land and all of the obfuscation that we're now seeing over and over demonstrated by mainstream media, and what's led to all of the sort of explosion on independent media. And it's always like he said, she said, everybody's pointing the finger at the different direction and trying to keep up with the echo chamber and all of the news that happens on a daily basis. That is like, oh my God, do you know what happened here? You're like on a pinball. You're just like constantly trying to sort things out, but then you're like, it's all the same thing. And so, for example, let's just take a snapshot of like the last, I don't know, for me, couple of hours this morning. So finally, George Santos, the guy I've been referring to as some sort of hybrid, the talented Mr. Ripley, although he's not very talented because he's more George Costanza. You know, this guy has just gotten indicted on 13 felony counts of wire fraud and misappropriation of funds and all degrees of lying, stealing, and cheating that is really as obvious as it is, and just ridiculous that the press didn't know what this guy was up to during the election cycle, and the people of his district, I believe in Long Island, voted for this guy given what a fraud he was, but they did anyway because everybody in the Republican Party is a fraud, and quite frankly, everybody in the Democratic Party is a fraud, but they just happen to have more accolades and they dress nicer and they speak in more acceptable language and they're not as hyperbolic, but at the same time, all of it is a train wreck of corruption. And you know that, but what you don't know is who did what, when, and how to do what they did, and you don't understand the laws or geopolitics or history or everything else. And I promise you, what I'm telling you and what I'm revealing to you is a continuation of really everything that got started back in, if you want to be precise, it's the interest rates during Jimmy Carter's presidency, but it was the Reagan administration and deregulation that led to everything that went on overdrive during the Clinton administration, and everything else is a consequence of that, okay? And still, nobody knows how the system works, even though I've got unbelievable amounts of information that's available for free. If you go to our website at www.thecon.tv and you click on videos, there's about 30 videos that have all of the revelations and insights and answers that, you know, really put all of this stuff into perspective. But you'd first have to find your way through all of the madness of the stuff that you're paying attention to, and then you'd have to find time to actually watch the stuff, and then you'd have to understand even more, which we put in our epic series, The Con, at www.thecon.tv. But let's go back to put it into perspective with George Santos. So what I observed this morning, of course, is the New York Times front page news, is all of the antics that George Santos is involved with, but it's literally child's play, the elementary level of fraud that's a third grader could, you know, figure out if they knew where to look and they got taught what the laws were. Let's call it 6th to 8th grader, but you get my drift. But, you know, it's tiny in comparison to what his colleagues and what the kingpins in both parties are dealing with, not to mention at the hierarchy of the list, as it, you know, has been revealed recently. And I happen to watch a very well done documentary on Clarence and Ginny Thomas, and of course, how they played everybody, you know, with the Supreme Court, which is just hateful, hurtful, beguiling, disgusting, all of the other sorts of you can't believe this is real sort of scenario, given that they're both, you know, got to the positions of power based on progressive battles won in previous generations to give an African American an opportunity at the Supreme Court and a woman, obviously, to be in the hierarchy, that when they combine their wonder twin powers of deception and fraud for a conservative, hateful movement, this is what you get. I mean, and then Donald Trump yesterday, obviously he gets the grand jury convicted him in a civil court on, you know, sexual misconduct. It wasn't rape. It was abuse, and then, you know, disparaging her character, Miss Jean Carroll, and, you know, there was a $5 million you know, that's what Trump is, going to have to pay unless he's able to worm his way out of it, which I'm sure he's going to have attorneys working on this, and he'll go out on the stump, if you will, as he runs as the, I think, far ahead candidate in the Republican Party. I guess the only guy even close would be DeSantis in Florida. But at the same time, look, let's compare and contrast just briefly this newcomer to fraud in the banality of our political system, our corrupt political system. But in contrast to Trump, I mean, Trump in the AG's office has got over 200 investigations into business fraud and deceit and deception and illegal reps and warranties and deceptive acts and practices and all manners of form of corruption and racketeering and tax fraud and everything you can possibly imagine. That it's been this guy's business model for decades and decades and decades, and yet he became president, right? And then on top of that, you've got the rape scenarios, and then you've got the rape of the American people and the insurrection and everything that leans towards with regards to tyranny and treason and all manner of shape of national security violations that he may have sold, which it looks like he did in some capacity. Whatever he had, in Mar-a-Lago to probably the Saudis, which is pretty easy to see that demonstrably between the relationship, of course, of his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and his former, Treasury Secretary Mnuchin. And nobody's asking questions, by the way, of how much the Trump companies got away with during the COVID emergency stimulus sort of scenarios. And that's maybe we'll pack that away for another day. But, between literally, think about it, from George Santos to all of these things happening with Trump to Clarence Thomas. And again, those are just, they're huge revelations, but nobody's stopping this train wreck of corruption. And, many of you, and again, like I happened to see, on Twitter today, Carrie Lake, the former TV host turned, political candidate for governor. I mean, she's all over the place about how mainstream media is a lie and deception, but her come from is all about COVID. And then, of course, Biden and Hunter Biden and all of the scenarios with Burisma. And okay, even if that's true, right? Compared to Trump, not even remotely close to the level. It's like comparing, a little leaguer to somebody in the NFL sort of thing in terms of industrial size fraud. So that's just ridiculous. And she starts to bloviate about truth, but she's just serving who she's getting paid by, whoever that is. And I haven't done a deep dive on Carrie Lake, but whatever. And then you get these revelations that, Tucker Carlson is now going to have his own show on Twitter. And we saw a couple of weeks ago, of course, Elon Musk appeared on Fox in an interview with Twitter, and it makes all the sense in the world. I'm like looking back 3 weeks in the rearview mirror, and I'm like, oh yeah, that was all a setup probably from the beginning, given what they knew was coming down the pike with the Dominion lawsuit settlement, which still Fox has credibility to all these people on the right that are like, they don't care about truth. They don't care about the law. They don't care about liberty and justice. They care about their hyper-focused white supremacy that is tyranny, that is the new Confederacy, and in some capacity on the more extreme side, some sort of version of, white supremacy, hatred, Nazism, whatever the case. We see it on display with these mass killers all the time. And you've got this Republican Party that's like, yeah, we're all about right to life. And we're also really hateful towards Epstein and child molestation and sexual predation and trafficking. Okay, but meanwhile, all right, they're all about making sure that we have no regulation on military assault weapons that deranged individual lunatics go into schools and murder children. Okay, so right to life, this, right? And then the Epstein thing, yeah, I mean, it is sickening, and it's also interesting that, and I had mentioned this a couple of truth bombs ago, that you have these revelations about all of these scientists that were involved with Epstein Island, and none other than Noam Chomsky, who's gotten really defensive about this, which is a big disappointment, but I guess it's not really all that surprising to me. But when you think, what's really interesting to me is when you can think about the history in the real history of what Epstein might have been involved with in the intelligence apparatus, and creating corners and being able to leverage information on scientists, the best scientists, most notable scientists, and business leader and tech leaders, and all of the centers of power and those things that the economy really depend on, and they're going to leverage all these guys for information so that they can manipulate them and control them. Okay, that all makes sense, and that's part and parcel to intelligence from throughout history. I mean, let's go back to Caligula and probably the Roman Empire. I'm sure all of the trade secrets behind the scenes is what elevates power. And of course, we all saw it on display brilliantly in Game of Thrones and any other manner of fantastic television series that the writers always get, be it, the Succession or the likes of Peaky Blinders and many others. Some of my favorite, every time I start talking about it, I can't stop thinking about Breaking Bad. I think Walter White is probably one of the best representations of what happens behind the scenes of somebody who's very motivated and smart can make things happen. But anyway, getting back to the point, corruption and what I am and who I am and everything that I'm trying to achieve. So look, I'm this independent muckraking journalist who 3 years ago, after a 13-year journey, or I'm in the midst of the 13-year journey, it just seems like it never ends. It revealed after my own personal career blow up and life blow up in 2008 after the great financial crisis, I started pulling on threads, and it led to this monumental journey based on a miracle that I put together that the entire agencies and institutions of the United States that are tasked to do this to the tune of $90 billion a year, and I'm talking about the FBI, the DOJ, the SEC, and so forth, that they never did. And so somebody like myself, who's just a naturally inquisitive person and a guy of experience, and I know how to get things done, and I just happen to be always an interested guy in the way things work. But as a professional, I was a producer, so I know how to put deals together and make things happen. I didn't know I was going to become an investigative journalist, but I did. And now I'm looking over my shoulder in the rearview mirror against the previous 10 years that put all of that together, because my partner, who was a man of extraordinary wealth, a man of really, quite frankly, an amazing amount of courage, but he got to the point after we released the con and we did everything we could to build the audiences and get this over the wall of the obfuscation and the incredible amount of information that we're all subject to every single day, we never really caught fire. And so I had to go out on my own, and I started to press and press and press. And why do I press? Well, because the revelations that I have, first of all, connect everything that has created the world that we live in, okay? And it's a story that goes back decades, but the last 20 years is like an eye blink, but it's all a continuum. And as it relates to the 2008 great financial crisis, none of that happens without the deregulation and the sort of maneuverings of the power and how things work behind the scenes, particularly when you know the details of the legislation that created what ultimately allowed what took place, against the backdrop of how we actually figured out all these answers going back to the Great Depression. And all of those answers are on display in our work at www.thecon.tv. Meanwhile, though, I had to go out on my own, and I had to create, what we call Patrick Lovell Truth Bombs the Con. And in context to, Tucker Carlson going on and having his own show on Twitter, let's just say that Patrick Lovell Truth Bombs the Con is in direct competition with that bloviating, pseudo-white, supremacist Ivy League, freaking Pretzel Logic, gymnast of bullshit that will, talk around everything to try to get people's cackles up in a specific market that's going to give him tens of millions of viewers from people that buy all this stuff. The people that listen to Carrie Lake, the people that listen to Donald Trump, the people who voted for George Santos, the people that are listening to Kevin McCarthy, who's allowing George Santos to stay on even though he's being indicted by the powers that be. I mean, it's just absolutely absurd how gross and corrupt we've become. I didn't even mention Marjorie Taylor Greene and Jim Jordan and the rest of them, okay? But is it, of course, the Republicans that are completely guilty? No, they're a special brand of you got to be kidding me. But the Democrats, it's almost worse because they are smarter. Most of them come out of the Ivy League. They're all revolving door. It's the actual Borg that they serve, and this Borg is what I've revealed to you. that set up and rug pulled tens of millions of people, starting with the most vulnerable, African Americans, through predation, through home incentives that ultimately ripped their houses away from people who own their homes. And again, you'd see that in our work. I mean, the ultimate tragedy turned miracle is the story of Addie Polk, who we discovered, who was a 91-year-old African American woman who had to shoot herself 5 times in the chest because they were evicting from a home that she owned, and nobody believed her. And there's a reason for all of that, which is on display in the con. But she opened up this incredible Pandora's box to reveal to us the only RICO conviction for this story that was exactly what the entirety of Wall Street was doing. So I represent Main Street and the American dream against the griftopia and the never-ending lies of corruption of this system. And what I found in this whole thing, even though every single thing that I'm revealing to you, is illegal, okay? In the hierarchy of how this whole system works. And sorry for the background noise. It's what happens when you're DIY. So ultimately, I just discovered the emperor's no clothes. And the core tumor of all of this is that the Federal Reserve used $29 trillion to backdoor illegally to a corrupt financial system that, if you understand the statutes of what it is to be the lender of last resort within the Federal Reserve, to be able to make emergency loans in emergency times, it wasn't to back up a global racketeering enterprise. And the question is, why did they do that? Corruption, revolving door. It all emanated from the Obama administration, who were cleaning up the mess that the Bush administration did, that the Clinton administration allowed, that got started in before in Reagan, that led to Bush 1. And it's all a continuum. So you got to think of I'll just give you a couple of things to think. 5 things to think about. The SNL crisis was the first act. Then we get into the control fraud and the hyperinflation of assets and bubble mechanics of the tech bubble in the early 2000s, which led to the Enron era frauds, which then led to the granddaddy of them all, which is the 2008 great financial crisis. And to put it into context, even on a big level, like I continue to say on Twitter, that Elon Musk is worth approximately $172 billion, and I'm carrying around the $29 trillion truth. Do the math. And so I'm going head to head with Tucker with the revelations of this information and everything else that impacted literally over 100 million people of all stripes. Doesn't matter if it was everybody from the African-American community that was kind of the test subjects to begin with, that created predatory loans to be able to serve the system that was built in all the mechanics that we show you in the con, that ultimately blew up the world because we had $600 to $800 trillion in derivatives based on this, sawdust securities pipeline, and what Bill Cohen called House of Cards, which is exactly what it was. And now we're in 2023, where all of the same stuff is repeating itself again and again and again, and yet we're about to go up against the debt ceiling. We have bank runs. We've got this corruption that's like crazy. We don't know who's going to be in control next. We know that there's a major push towards fascism and hatred, which anybody who believes in democracy should be on the side against that, which I'm seeing a growing number of people reacting to that. But one thing I got to tell you is that Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, AOC, whomever, Biden will not arrest the corruption that I'm telling you. How do I know? They haven't. And they never will. And Biden's been a part of it for 4 decades. Is Biden the cause of it? No, he's kind of a yes man that does it in a nice way. He's an acceptable dude within the machine that lets stuff happen in Delaware, in terms of tax write-offs and shelters. And then there's a whole lot of other things that Biden's been involved with. I don't need to relitigate, everything in his past. But the bottom line is that when you compare the corruption of Trump, even, which is a Goliath corruption, and everything that he's involved with, it's still child's play compared to what Wall Street gets away with and has gotten away with and continues to get away with. And it all comes from the Federal Reserve. They've got complete capture of the Federal Reserve. And our Federal Reserve chairman is a lawyer who came out of all of these huge corporations that get benefit from this stuff. Whether it was, I think he came out of Sullivan and Cromwell, which is a law firm that actually was responsible for revealing and playing the role in terms of saving Wall Street's fraud. They're probably the most important, well-calibrated, connected law firm in the United States, above Covington and Burling and all of the others. Sullivan and Cromwell is where Jerome Powell came out of, and he was also working for the Carlyle Group, which is one of the largest military-industrial contractors and private equity firms that exist. And so who's this guy serving?
right? He's not an economist first and foremost, but economists are all academics. They're not people who understand what happens under the umbrella of the banks and these private equity, companies and hedge funds and all of the insider trading and the control fraud and everything that this goddamn system operates. And so, my closing statement for the moment is that, look, it's not a democracy. The democracy's been betrayed. They rug pulled democracy. They hijacked it. The law is not supreme. It's all a manipulation to serve the powerful that are stealing from you. And we give trillions of dollars to keep the rich richer, and they spend billions of dollars to further corrupt the system so they can grift trillions. And so we have a corporate fascist state undergirded by a criminal syndicate that uses socialism, literally, to fuel the mafiocracy, because that's what this is. It's an illegal organization that should have been taken down for racketeering, but of course it didn't, even though I proved that it should have, because we found the only RICO conviction of its kind in the entire country, which was a miracle, based on the Pandora's box of an African-American woman who had to commit suicide to get us there, which is absolutely horrific. But that's the kind of truth I have, and I've got loyalty to the truth, and everybody and everyone that I've met that has fought the good fight and continues to fight the good fight, because at the end of that, this corruption is birthing fascism. And I have two enemies, massive enemies: corruption and fascism. And we've got to defeat both. So if you, me, and everyone you see who isn't a Nazi, who believes in dignity and decency and integrity and dignity, liberty, and sustainability, if we come together and we merge into unity, we will defeat tyranny. And that's our destiny. It's the clean New Deal. We've got to root out the tumor, and we've got to purge corruption. And the only way we're going to do that is if tens of millions of us come together. And the only way that's going to happen is if you believe me, if I am the deliverer. Does it make me, some sort of this guy accused me of having a savior complex. No, man, I don't have a savior complex. I've got a freaking devotion and patriotic complex to the law and liberty and justice for all. Okay, sorry. I don't put myself above anybody else. This is about you and me, which equals we. And so and this is how this is going to have to work, because like I said, it's all corrupt. This is the United States. You get what you pay for. So if you're in silos and you're all over the place and you're chasing other people, some people are going to just wind up giving money to Bernie Sanders because, right? The guy got like $187 million back in 2016, saying that Wall Street's business model is fraud and is going to end corruption and then change the day. He never did. And I love Bernie, but he doesn't talk about details. He's a hyperbole, not hyperbole. He talks in platitudes. Same with Elizabeth Warren and everybody else. I'm the only one who's got the answers. Does that make me a know-it-all, that's smarter than everybody else? No, I did the work, man. And I was driven. And in a free market economy where democracy is also, you have the choice to buy into what you believe. You can buy the lies, and that's all I see is everybody buys lies. And I'm telling you the truth. So what I'm trying to get you to understand is that the billionaires spend billions to corrupt the system so they can grift trillions. And they own it, and everything else is bullshit. Okay, that's all there is to it. I've got all the answers that can take the guys down, but I need it in the hands and the heads and the hearts of tens of millions of you. If I can start off with 1,300 of you, we'd get on first base, and this is what we're going to do. If you contribute, if you invest $13, that's all I'm asking for. Not 100, not 20, not 50, not 60. I'm asking for $13 in honor of the original 13 colonies that fought their battle to ultimately give us separation of powers and the Bill of Rights and our democracy and everything else that Jefferson said, it's a great system if you can keep it. And the blood of liberty has to be refreshed with the blood of patriots and tyrants. Yeah, that's the system, man. And we did it over and over and over. We did it during, there were abolitionists from the beginning, even though we know all the bad guys that were out there too. But we ended up having, the Civil War, and it destroyed the country for decades and decades. And ultimately, liberty and justice won until it didn't because of the civil rights. And this battle goes on and on forever. And so if you invest $13 and you get 13 people, you're gonna get a bumper sticker and a T-shirt. Our hashtags are: failure is not an option. When you have the truth, you're bulletproof. Rise, roar, revolt. It's not rocket science, it's racketeering. The truth is power to the people. The truth is chemo to corruption, and so much more. And you'll also get a bumper sticker and all that jazz. But the bottom line is that if you invest and we got on first base, I'm going to build a podcast, a real podcast, where I'll have all the people with the answers that I've built these relationships over 10 years and be able to get to a position where it's like, oh my God, we're going to break through the madness and the lies and the deception of people like well, really everybody knowingly, like Tucker Carlson, but then second tier, like Russell Brand, who's, chasing the algorithms, and Jimmy Dore, who's chasing, whatever his agenda is. And they all talk in, platitudes, just like Bernie and Elizabeth, because they're trying to fiend on all of the numbers of the algorithms, because they're, in this society, the elites really are pimps, whores, and junkies, and then you've got all of the parasites of the financial industry, and then of course the sheep that are set up, right? Because you can't keep up with the stuff that it's really hard to. So I'm the vector of truth, and I've got these answers that I've spent years and years getting. And to put it into comparison, Elon Musk is worth 174 billion. I'm carrying around $29 trillion truth that can take down the whole system, which is now really a $70 trillion truth. So do the math, okay? And then ultimately, is there anything I want to finish up with in terms of the ask? Yeah, again, I mean, 13. So look, my end game is 13 million people to get to, $160 million, $69 million. If we have that, two things are going to happen. Okay, two things are going to happen, and this is the end goal. During the presidential election cycle, this is a campaign to purge corruption. I want to create a national barnstorming revival tour with all of the information I have that proves all of the corruption of the courts that took out tens of millions of people with illegal documentation fabrication, because it was also paid by quantitative easing, which I read in the New York Times today. There's enough commercial real estate availability in Manhattan that you can fill up 26 Empire State Buildings. That's the same thing that's going around the entire country. Why? Because of everything I'm revealing to you. Quantitative easing and all of the systemic, emergency stimulus that go to all the bad guys that are gaming everybody. And the last week on Sunday, I saw that there's, child slavery in factories cleaning up slaughterhouses, just like the jungle in Upton Sinclair over 100 years ago, that's owned by Blackstone. And the highest paid chief executive officer on Wall Street, guy by the name of Steven Schwartzman. And that's all part and parcel to the free money and trillions of dollars of money that we gave these goddamn companies to rape and pillage. And then on top of it, the Federal Reserve buys their assets. It's corporate fascism, but it's also socialism. That's the whole point. But it's not for the people. It's for the people that have complete control, that are raping everybody left and right. And then media is just it's like a toxic lake of freaking pollution and lies. And we got to clean this stuff up. That's what this movement is all about. It's to purge corruption. Listen, I've talked longer than I wanted to, and I hope that I'm winning some people over. I mean, this is a heavy duty task, man. It's like pushing up a boulder backwards up to the top of Everest without shoes on, and I need help because I'm helping you. And again, this isn't about me. Am I going to stuff $169 million in my pocket like George Santos would? I guess you're just going to have to do your own due diligence and figure it out. I'm asking you for $13 because I've already put $4.5 million into all of the evidence that we have. So if you match me $4.5 million, then you'd have some credibility and you could actually be critical. You really could. Do you want to pony up $4.5 million? I'd love for you to. And then we could go take a deep dive and I'll show you everything I got on the sidelines, which is even more. Okay? But if you don't want to do that and you want to just watch my work and make your own judgment, go to www.thecon.tv. And that's the most important of all, because A, you got to understand how the system works. But B, my partner, who I don't have a relationship with anymore because he gave up on this because there's no market for truth, he's going to yank everything, because to have this stuff out, to the people on the platforms on Amazon and Apple and Microsoft, it costs money. And it's not going anywhere. And if you don't know it exists, you can't find it. And nobody's talking about it, you're not going to want to know to find it. And the bottom line is everybody just chases lies. It's all there. The $29 trillion truth is about to be erased from history if somehow we don't turn the table. That's why I'm pushing so hard. Everything I'm telling you is spot on truth, and then some. And then I've got this incredible podcast with our friends from the Real Progressives that if you do a Google search, you can find it at the New Untouchables. And then probably most importantly, if you go to my YouTube page at Patrick Lovell Truth Bombs the Con and you click on live and you see a thumbnail for Deception Owns You, 2.7 thousand people have already seen it. I did like an 11-hour filibuster that presents all of this information to the American people and then some. And literally tens of millions of people need to see that. I'm one guy. I need you to understand I'm one guy. I've got a group of people that fight tirelessly for me, and they're amazing. And there's like maybe 3 of us total, 1 and 3, interestingly, right? 13. So 1, 3. But, you know, again, the Department of Justice, the FBI, the DOJ, the SEC, all of these different agencies and everything else that have tens of thousands of people working for them, they have a budget annually of about $90 billion. I didn't have that. I didn't have those types of resources. And then also, media spends millions of dollars on people like Rachel Maddow and Tucker Carlson and Anderson Cooper to make sure that you don't know this stuff. And now you all know this stuff. But the answers aren't in Carrie Lake. The answers aren't in Russell Brand. Unfortunately, the answers aren't in Joe Rogan. As much as I like Russell Brand and Joe Rogan, they don't have the answers. They're chasing the algorithms. If we get tens of millions of people to pay attention to what I'm saying, I promise you, they'll come sniffing my jockstrap, and I'll give them a load of shit because I'll be like, listen, clowns, I've been trying to give you this information the whole time, and you missed it. So at the end of the day, the emperor wears no clothes, and I'm willing to take that risk because I'm the only guy that's got the goddamn answers. And do I do it because there's an opportunity here to prevail? So far, not. But I'll tell you, I've got a major tenacity to do this. And I'm like, fucking beast mode, ramming this goddamn truth down, as hard as I can into everybody's brain until it clicks. Because again, I believe in liberty and justice for all. I need systems to work. We all need systems to work. I believe in the American dream and upward mobility and dynamism and the genius of America. I know that nothing is impossible. And again, the most important hashtag of all, failure is not an option. Rise, roar, revolt. Onwards and upwards. Thanks for listening. Take care.